Hey there friends and enemies, JoPa here again, and just a few days out from the launch of Marvel Rivals, there is one major mistake that I hope the game avoids, and that is being hyper competitive and leaning into esports in a major way. And the reason I say this is that role, that niche is already filled. We have Overwatch, which tries to be very balanced in comparison. They really wanted for a long time their esport, the Overwatch League, to take off and be one of the biggest in the world. And I do not think another game, another hero shooter needs to be hyper competitive in that same realm. If players want to be super competitive and still have abilities, there's always Valorant they can go to as well. The beauty of what I've seen with Marvel Rivals so far is that we have 33 very diverse characters with different kits, and the meta looks like it's going to be incredibly interesting. And the chaos is something I do hope they embrace to a degree. Now, one of the best parts of what they've announced so far with Marvel Rivals is that we will be able to see eventually, maybe not at launch, the win and pick rates on the Marvel Rivals website, which I think is a great idea. So if there are extreme outliers, then they deserve to be buffed if they are underperforming, or nerfed if they are overperforming by a large margin. And so outside of that, I do hope there are balance changes over time. I don't want the game to be so unbalanced that it feels like you have to pick certain characters in order to have success, but I do think that as we go through various seasons of Marvel Rivals, certain characters should have their time to shine, and that should go across the board. There should always be an instance where certain characters are able to get that bit of love, and I feel like one of the things that has held Overwatch back, especially with Overwatch 2, is it feels like their designs are meant for competitive play, and because of that, you have to be limited in what types of abilities and how creative you can be with the different characters. And that, again, is something that I hope Marvel Rivals avoids in the long term. And we're already seeing some of that. So if you missed it yesterday, they did mention recently that they are going to have the newer characters like Iron Fist be duelist, even though they kind of fill a tank-like role, but they don't want traditional tank support and DPS characters. They want the different playstyles like Vanguard, Duelist, and Strategist to have a different feel from those traditional roles, and that's why they're not doing a role queue as well, because it does feel like Wolverine, Iron Fist, some of these Duelist characters can fill quasi-tank roles over the course of time. And if you get too competitive with the game, a lot of that flexibility will disappear. And with so many heroes in the roster, I think it's a perfect chance to be able to really mix and match and find fun playstyles that might be off meta, but still can be incredibly successful if you have a bit of creative thinking. And that is something that I feel like is missing from Overwatch. There does feel like there is certain ways to play the game. You have to swap if you're playing a character who doesn't play well into another character, or else you're considered to be throwing. And that is not something that I want. I want when one character is having success on the other team, I want the option to pick multiple different characters to try to change up to see if I can have success and not just bang my head in the wall. But this is where Overwatch, I think also, in leaning on the more competitive side, listens to the top players. Now, they will say that they don't get listened to often enough, and at the end of the day, you just can't please everybody. That is something that no PvP game has been able to make everyone happy all the time. It is quite literally impossible. And so, instead of relying on people's opinions or anything like that, you have to look at data. You have to look at how successful characters are at different skill levels, which I think is very important as well. And you also have to look at the fun factor, because sometimes characters will have a high pick rate because they are so fun, not because they are insanely powerful. And if they have a high pick rate but a low win rate, that is not necessarily a bad thing. And I think it's something that should be encouraged. So overall, I just feel like we have so many competitive games out there. This should be a type of game that you can kind of relax, have a good time with, and not take too seriously. I made a similar video talking about Destiny recently, and it feels like PvP players oftentimes want to have the most competitive and quote-unquote fair experience as possible, where the fun of these games is sometimes you'll die to silly stuff. Sometimes you'll get outmaneuvered by an ability that you didn't know the other team was ready to use, or they'll come up with a creative strategy that will take you out of your game. And all of that should be encouraged and not discouraged. That's something that I strongly feel like we are missing in the multiplayer PvP games that we get these days. Everything feels the same. You play Call of Duty, everyone is rocking the same loadouts that some YouTubers made as the meta loadouts that with the fastest TTK. You look at Overwatch, if you don't pick a certain character, you are going to get flamed for throwing. If you are looking at Destiny and you are not playing a certain playstyle, everyone calls you a casual and that you're a bot or whatever the case may be. And I want to get away from that as often as possible. That's why I'm looking forward to playing Marvel Rivals. I really want the quick play warriors who feel like they are better than everybody because they dominate quick play. I want those guys to run into crazy off meta picks that end up beating them from time to time. I want ranked to be a fun experience that doesn't feel like every single time you load in, you're facing off against the same 5 heroes, same 6 heroes. And it's just something that I don't know how avoidable that is at the end of the day. People love to play the most powerful stuff, but if enough characters are powerful and fun, hopefully that tips the scales. But at the end of the day, I do feel like we are looking to be heading in that direction with Marvel Rivals. It does feel like the developers are trying to make this game for as wide a base as possible without the same limitations and restrictions that we see in Overwatch. And so I would argue that's actually a good thing for Overwatch as well, because if you want the hyper competitive experience, you're probably going to have to go in that direction. Whereas if you want to have a more fun, varied, and shenanigans filled experience, then that's likely what you're going to find in Marvel Rivals. And I do believe there's room for both in the gaming space, so long as people understand what each game is trying to be and embrace the nature of it. Anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Do you agree or disagree? Do you want Marvel Rivals to be super competitive? Do you want it to be an esport where they have tournaments and stuff like that? I personally don't, but I'm sure they'll pop up from time to time. I'm sure that will be a conversation within the community. So I am definitely curious to see how that's going to go. Anyway, let me know